Hey guys, we're gonna start. I don't know if there are still people walking from other buildings, but we can definitely start. And first of all, thanks very much all of you for being here. I know that some of you came from a long distance. I really appreciate it. And today it's we are gonna talk about what are the progress about RAS targeting in human cancer. And I met Terry a year ago at a conference in Italy, and by that time I used to say happily unemployed for a month or so, because I was transitioning from Memorial Sloan Kettering to here, and I started my own lab here at Hopkins on July 1st. So we're going to be 1 year old in a few days. Feel growing up. And so the overall goal of these few slides that I prepared for you today is just, to give you an overview of what is that we do and we face every day. And then the discussion is meant to be, very interactive. So I'm going to give you this little introduction, and then I'm going to give the podium to Terry. She will, talk about a few things as well. And then the goal is, you guys ask questions. I wanted this to be interactive. Don't be shy. And we are very happy to have you here today. So I try to be very schematic. One thing that people working on KRAS or on RAS proteins in general have been facing is that since their first discovery that happened in the early 80s, nothing very impactful happened for 30 years. In the, translating the fact that RAS are the most common mutated human oncogene. They're mutated on many different cancer types, but there was no drugs. And KRAS has been considered undruggable for many years. Until 10 years ago, when there was the first discovery of a very specific type of inhibitor that was able to inhibit just one form of mutant KRAS. And couple of years ago, we started having the first FDA approval for these drugs. I'd like to, introduce you to KRAS using an analogy. So this is a cartoon of the Mount Everest, and this is a work like a commentary that we did a few years ago when I still was a grad student in Italy. And I used to work with Alberto Bardelli, who was a postdoc here before, moving back to Italy. So it's a big family. And, Everest is being considered, impossible to, reach the top of the tallest, highest mountain in the whole world. And, even the most experienced hikers were said, you cannot just conquer Mount Everest. And, this is the challenge. And sometimes you hear something like this and you're like, okay, this is not going to happen. Fine, I will find, something else to do or to work on. And then there are some other people that are more stubborn and they try to challenge this assumption. So this commentary was published in 2014, so 10 years ago. And all the little camps that you see here are all the ways that people were trying to block KRAS in tumors using combination of other drugs, alternative approaches, because we couldn't really block KRAS itself. 10 years later, where we are today, this is something that happened in December 2022. The first G12C inhibitor was approved by FDA for the treatment of non-small cell lung cancer. That was a huge thing for everyone. G12C mutant non-small cell lung cancer are very frequent. But, G12C mutation doesn't happen only in non-small cell lung cancer, happens also in other tumor types like colorectal cancer. So in this slide here, I'm summarizing the work that we and others did over 6 years, 5 to 6 years, when we initially saw that the G12C inhibition alone wasn't working in colorectal cancer. So you see don't know if I can actually point, but yeah, the first part of this slide is showing that there is very, very little response to G12C inhibitors alone in G12C mutant colorectal cancer. So then we went back to the lab, and this panel in the middle shows the result of a patient-derived xenograft. So this is an avatar. I mean, you're probably familiar with the movie. So what we did was to implant a colorectal cancer of a patient in these mouse models, and we tried to combine the G12C inhibitor plus an EGFR inhibitor. So these are drugs that are currently used in clinic. And that made the response way better. You see, like the blue line means that the tumor in the mouse completely regressed, disappeared. These studies allow the modification of the clinical trials in a sense that we could combine with EGFR inhibitors, and the response rate increased of threefold or even more. And that basically led to a very, very recent FDA accelerated approval of this combination in colorectal cancer that happened 4 days ago. So it's it's a big achievement, and we are very happy to be part of it. Another thing that it's ongoing today, because so far I spoke about a very unique, specific KRAS mutation, but there is also more, and I know you guys are all aware about this. This is a figure from a paper that was just published a few weeks ago that shows that with a non-mutant specific, so this pan-RAS inhibitor that can block all the mutant form and active form of RAS, it's effective in patients with pancreatic cancer and non-small cell lung cancer. Again, this is all very promising, but I really want to point the attention to this slide, which I think it's probably the most important I'm going to show you today. We need to focus on the challenges. So finally, after decades, we've been told there is no way we can target RAS. Now we have tools that we can use in the lab and drugs that we can use in the clinic. And this is great because we still have so many open questions that are, regarding the basic RAS biology, but also the way the tumor responds to these inhibitors. Here, my lab is collaborating with many other labs here, and because KRAS and RAS proteins are mutated in many different cancer types. In this picture here, you can see that it's all over the place. And it's all over the place for adult malignancies, but also in pediatric malignancies. So we can, these are our challenges. And what we need to do is to advance knowledge in basic RAS biology, in resistance, because ultimately that's what, you can, even if you have a great response, most of the time, if not always, resistance happens. So we need to study these things in the lab and in the clinic. And again, as I said, it's not just one tumor type. It's everywhere, and the efforts, we are having like a very amazing collaboration. I'm very happy that Alex is here also with the hematology group. And so we hope we can bring this drug to the clinic as well. So fingers crossed. And I'm going to conclude with this last couple of slides. So the effort is basically, can be summarized in this sentence. We need to start thinking in a non-conventional way and dare more. And, studying RAS inhibition from preclinical and clinical perspective must be happening, at the same time. And what we do is trying to work together from the bench to the bedside and back. So this is the last sentence of that paper about the Mount Everest that I showed you earlier. As with all journeys that are originally considered impossible, success will be highly gratifying. But if we don't put these three things together, it's gonna be, it's gonna take longer. But I think, we are working on this. We're going, trying to learn to gain more knowledge and hopefully finally getting the cure. And with that, thank you so much. I'm gonna give the podium to Terry, and thank you. Let's see if I can do this without messing up too much.
Hi, everybody. My name is Terry Conneran, and I'm up here to amuse you and look foolish with technology for today. How am I doing so far? Okay? I'm hanging in there. Okay, good. 2 thumbs up. So I'm scoring my points. Okay, right here, you're going to see my family. And I choose this picture because my son's eyes are closed, my youngest daughter's mouth is open, and my blonde is just being blonde. And so that's pretty much where we began with my diagnosis 7 years ago. I was diagnosed with lung cancer, and my family said, well, you know, we've never done any of those things we said we were going to do, and what do you want to do? And I said, I want a family picture. Now, we do have better family pictures than this, but this was actually one of the more fun ones. And so I like really making sure that people get a chance to see the personalities of my family and what they are and kind of a little bit about them. The blonde there, she'll be getting married this coming fall. Yesterday was the curly-haired one's 29th birthday. The blonde, they called me on her 25th birthday to tell me that I had non-small cell lung cancer, which wasn't some big glamorous journey. And if you would like me to bore you about it sometime for a couple hours, I'm happy to do that. But really, it boils down to one thing. I had lung cancer and I needed to do something about it. And I was really afraid. What I thought was going to happen to me is my point of reference was what I had seen from my grandmother in the 60s, where they basically gutted the woman and she died at 42. And then from my mom, who had breast cancer when she was 34 and died at 50 after being tortured with chemo and radiation. As a patient, you show up and you're vulnerable and you're scared, and I'm trusting a total stranger with my life. Nice to meet you. And that's where we began our journey. And I had stage 3 lung cancer 7 years ago. They did, even though I had 100% PD-L1, they opted to put me straight into surgery, and then they changed their mind. They changed their mind. I don't sound like the advocate that I'm in before you today, does it? They changed their mind and instead put me on 4 rounds of chemo and surgery and cut out half my lung. But I did well. And then after kind of going through that, I was trying to get back my life and got involved with some support groups and, you know, exercise classes because this time I'm going to do this right. I was 55 and I needed to get back my body and feel like a sense of control, and started getting connected with exercise groups and what have you. They did one through my cancer center, which was too inconvenient for me to attend, but they did one close to my house at the Y, and I went there. I met a bunch of breast cancer people and learned a lot. In breast cancer, they have a whole bunch of resources that we just plain don't have. But it gave me enough information to ask the right questions about palliative care. Now I know that, seeing an integrative oncologist, seeing a pharmacologist, what have you. And it also led me to wanting to understand my disease better. So I got involved with lung cancer support groups. Why is that important? I started hearing about these biomarker things. And I'd walk into a room full, it would be like this many people. And I would see lung cancer patients in a lung cancer group and be like, EGFR people over here and ALK people over here and ROS1 over here and RET. And somehow I'd miss sorority rush. Nobody chose me. So I felt like kind of a lost puppy. So I went to my doctor and I'm like, hey, what am I? Well, you don't have anything. I mean, you don't have anything. Well, we did testing when you were first diagnosed, but you don't have anything. Okay, I don't have anything. Well, that was kind of dismissive. I took it. So, all right, that's the way it rolls. Well, as it kind of went on down, you know, after that diagnosis, stage 3 it was, I had to keep going back for scans. About every 3 or 4 months, got scanned, and sure enough, I got scanned and it came back. Subsequently, it's come back 5 times over the past 7 years. But the first 2 times is really what made a difference. The first 2, after the first one, we were able to ablate it. They did more testing. Second time, they were able to hit it with some radiation, which moved me technically from a stage 3 to a stage 4 patient. But I'm still sticking to the stage 3 because I like the odds better. And I realized from going to these groups that a second opinion at a big center might not be such a bad idea. And that if I pissed off my doctor, oh well, it was my body, and I had that right. So I kind of had built up my own confidence and went out for that second opinion at a large center, because I'm from Charlotte, North Carolina, and I was at a community center. Not tiny by any stretch of the imagination, but not large either. Just kind of like an average run-of-the-mill. I think they call it a hybrid. So I went out for that second opinion, and at the second opinion, first thing the doctor says is, well, we reran your genomic reporting, and your first biomarker report came back the same as this one did. You're KRAS G12D. I can't tell you to this day what this doctor looks like, because that's all I remember. I'm thinking, I can go home and find my people. This is what happens when retired PTA moms are looking for something to do. And it's like, I'm going to go home and join a committee. And we're going to make something happen. If you don't believe I'm the volunteer committee person, ask my friend Patty, because she is here and she's walked through this journey with me. But I can tell you, I went through and I found out KRAS, and I went online and I looked up one way and down the other. And this was December 2019. And I checked with everybody that I knew at all the lung cancer groups. They said, no, there isn't a KRAS group. Well, that's stupid. So I started a group, Facebook group, because that's what people my age do. January 2020, we started a Facebook group. And I thought, what is it I really want to accomplish? So I want to kick cancer's KRAS. I want to be a KRAS kicker, because nobody told me it's called KRAS. In fact, they wouldn't even tell me why sometimes it had a large K or a small K or a dash or a hyphen, or why there are letters after or before it. And sometimes it had all sorts of random things with it that didn't seem to make any sense. So I just went, okay, I like that. Sassy, got attitude. This KRAS Kickers. So we started the KRAS Kickers in January 2020 as a Facebook group. And I thought, where can this go? I have no idea. But when I started doing a little digging and finding out that this thing I had, this KRAS, was undruggable, it's like, wow. And then I found out this KRAS G12D thing, I kind of dodged a bullet. It hit my lungs. And it was more common in pancreatic cancer. I thought, wow, I don't want anybody to feel left out. I want to make sure that we're all inclusive. So the KRAS Kickers from the beginning, although I'm a lung cancer patient, was all about inclusivity, period. And it's about all types of GRAS cancers. So much so that that's where you'll see the socks. And we have socks in here for everybody. And I recognize a face or two in the crowd, and I know the people that walk alongside of us, and I know the people that walk with us. But what the socks really represent isn't a pair of socks. This isn't something that you just throw in your drawer and you ignore. We, the patients, we're the soul in these socks. Y'all wrap yourselves around us, and you surround us and walk alongside of us. KRAS Kickers is about walking alongside of people and getting connected. We use the colors on their socks. They're specific to the most common places you find RAS cancers. Blue is the colorectal, white is lung, purple is pancreatic, gray, brain's an ugly place that has a tendency to go, and it also kind of represents all the others that we are. And it says kick cancer's KRAS on the feet. Why? Because we need to be walking in step. But beyond that, okay, and now we're around 8,000 people worldwide, 110 different countries, okay? Which has been 4 years. We have a couple people here that are a part of it. You even have people that came here from other states. Besides New Jersey, Alabama, okay? Why? To see your labs. Why? Because the power of us being together and is making a difference. Subsequently, what do we do with KRAS? It's not good enough that it's driving our cancer. We're going to take it and we're going to turn it on its edge and we're going to make a difference. That's what you see behind me. You see that KRAS is what we use to drive us, not just the cancer. Knowledge, research, and advocacy together equals survivorship. Why? That's hope. And we only are going to get that hope from walking alongside of it, getting that information, having the things and doing what it takes to eliminate these KRAS holes. And those KRAS holes, exactly what you think, exactly who you think they are. I'm sure there couldn't possibly be any on the roads here in Baltimore. I know we have them in the medical system. Probably you'd call them gaps, barriers, healthcare literacy problems, equity, healthcare outcomes literacy or equity. And what boils right down to it, we're talking about the 90% middle. Because 90% middle of us, we need to get connected. We need to know. We need to know what our KRAS is. We need to know what we need to do. And we're only going to be able to survive by getting the right treatments at the right times and knowing what it takes. So anything that interferes with that is that KRAS hole. So I leave you with this, that together we can join forces, and together we can do what it takes to walk alongside of each other to kick cancer's KRAS. And so for you all, the final thing I need you to know is y'all are going to have a pair of socks to take home with you. And if you don't like the socks because it's so hot, guess what? We have tattoos. And you see this little guy, he's our little mascot. And I think it's particularly poignant because that thing there is, he's going to do what it takes. And notice that skateboard, because there's nothing sassier than a frog on a skateboard. So thank you guys for being here. And let's all do what we can. And don't be afraid to get people connected to us. And just for a mention, we have not just KRAS, but NRAS and HRAS patients as well. It's just KRAS Kickers has a little bit more sassafras to it. Thank you.
So apparently we're going to use this. That one's better? Oh, no, okay. This one works too. And yeah, thank you. So yeah, well, it's always hard to begin to talk after Terry's because I mean I really love her. I mean, if that wasn't clear enough yet, it's good to have you. Sometimes I wonder, you have been through a lot. Your journey has been, but you can see, the purpose, of all of these and what you created out of a very, very bad thing that happened to you. And to me, this is fantastic. So, yeah, thank you.
Okay, well, I did create something. It was there all along, okay? I mean, you guys were working on trying to drug something that was there all along, right? And so I not doing anything special, really. I just am seeing, I just want to connect with other people that are like me. And just merely, if I get 2 or 3 people together, and see people that I know coming together in this room, I mean, hey, I mean, I'm happy. You have no idea how happy I am. I drag myself all over the world to do this. So thanks for doing this, you guys. And thank you guys for what it is that you're doing. I don't know, like, there's a lot of researchers in here and doctors in here, and there's their patients. And do you know how much I just wanted to be able to get people to get connected and see? I guess it's just, I really believe you're either part of the problem or part of the solution. And until you open up and establish a rapport, and you start seeing the eyes of the other person. It's one thing to stare at a mouse or just stare at a piece of paper. It's entirely different to actually get connected. And that goes on both sides. So thanks for hosting us and having us here today. And thanks for everything you guys are doing, every single step of the way, okay? And a lot of, a lot of the folks, like, so I see you guys doing presentations, okay? A lot of the other folks out here are doing, like, a lot of the work. I mean, not that you're not. Wait a minute. You know what I meant. They're making y'all look good.
Yeah. So because we didn't really have time to actually introduce Nilo and Kristen, because I mean, almost everyone know Nilo and Kristen very well, but not the patients. So if you guys want to, do a little introduction, I can give.
Sure. So I'm Nilo Azad. I'm a GI medical oncologist here. And I have been focusing on colorectal cancer and biliary tract cancers and a bit of pancreas cancer because we are a major pancreatic cancer center. And so it's very hard to work here and not work on pancreatic cancer as well. So I have worked in that space as well. But my biggest role, and the reason I'm probably here, is because I have been co-leading our phase 1 or our developmental therapeutics program here for many years. And so I have been through the transition of 10 years ago when I ran my first KRAS focused trial in pancreatic cancer, very much like what you had put up there, Sandra. We were trying to target downstream of the KRAS mutation because we couldn't target KRAS because you can't target KRAS. And so we did that in pancreatic cancer. It looked beautiful in the laboratory. Our laboratory colleagues were showing great responses in mice. We cured so many mice. We did it in human beings and it didn't work so well. So it was the first, I was there then, and I have been lucky enough to run a lot of the clinical trials here as a site for the KRAS inhibitors, especially the ones that are not G12C. I think Kristen's really focused on the lung cancer specific studies, and so I've been lucky over the last year or two to be focusing on the many new KRAS inhibitor drugs that are targeting the other KRAS mutations that have been extraordinarily exciting. And so those have been running through our program, and we are excited that we are really kind of focusing on this. We're opening 5 trials in this space in the next few months. We don't have nearly enough slots. For every slot that opens up for a patient, we have a waiting list of 10 or 15 patients. And so I think that would be great for us to talk about in a few minutes about some of those challenges. But we're really trying to do everything we can to have options available for our patients. So,
great, thanks. I'm Kristen Marone. I think I've met most of you in the audience because I got invited down to Charlotte in the spring, which was awesome. I'm one of the thoracic oncologists here. And like Nilo mentioned, KRAS is an area of my clinical and research interest. You all heard me drone on a bit about the vaccine trial that we have, which is actually from the scientists in the GI group who developed that study, and we have adapted it for our lung cancer patients. So that would also be, I think, something great to hear about because I think a lot of us here and in the audience are a part of those studies. And then we are also looking to move some of the KRAS drugs into the early stage lung cancer space to see how we can learn from using those drugs in that area and see if we can help our patients further. I think one of the things that we also love looking at is how in lung cancer specifically, the intersection of immune-based therapies and targeted therapies and what that means for people. So a lot of what the work that we do in our lung cancer group focuses on understanding that a bit more as well. So I will pass the mic back over.
Yeah. So first of all, if there is any question, please feel free. I would like to follow up on what Nilo just said about the clinical trials and the fact, because we have been mentioning this like 1,000 times already today. It's KRAS and RAS mutation are very, very frequent. So this is a real challenge because, of course, the clinical trial are starting. There are options available, but I always wonder what can be, the best way to optimize this in order to try to get more patients enrolled, or what is the clinical practice to get that to work the best as possible.
So there's a lot of steps to this, and some of them are coming from the private industry pharmaceutical company world, and then some of the crass holes are coming from us and from academic institutions and some of our challenges as well. But I think broadly, I'm going to say I think it's mostly coming from the private industry side. So I think the reality of the way that drugs are developed is that there's a new drug will come out, and there's a kind of stepwise process. So first it gets tested in advanced stage patients that have been trusted, who have already had multiple different lines of therapy, and they do a small study, and it is done slowly because it's being done for safety, and so that study takes a year to do, and then when there's some sign of activity of the drug that it works, Then they move it up a little bit earlier and they broaden it a little bit. So we're talking about studies that have 50 to 100 patients. And then we have studies that in the next line of therapy have 200 patients. And then in the larger setting where they're trying to get FDA approval, maybe a study that has a little under 1,000 patients. So when you think of the magnitude of the problem of how many people with KRAS mutations are out there, millions, and you're talking about a drug that by the time it's FDA approved 3 or 4 years later, that's the accelerated timeline, 3 to 4 years later, that maybe 1,000 people will have been exposed to it. It just gives you a sense of how slowly things go. And it's done for safety, but it's also done because that's the way the FDA has done things for a really long time. So when I think about what patients can do and what we as physicians and academics can do, it's about advocacy with our regulatory bodies to move more quickly. Our group right now has been working on a KRAS vaccine that we're trying to deploy in bile duct cancers. So Dr. Baretti and Dr. Yarshwin are co-leading that. And we've gone back and forth with the FDA how many times now? And the study is 6 months delayed because of some of those interactions. And so I think that pressing need to try to make people understand on all sides that we need to go quicker. And then on the company side, they're trying to protect an asset that for them is worth millions and millions and millions of dollars. So they want to be very as careful as possible, and they want to cherry pick as much as possible. And so I think that is also part of the challenge. And this is just kind of sharing what when you go speak with, you go on the Hill and you speak with your political representatives, when you talk to the FDA, when you write letters, what are the things that are worth really pushing about? And it's very powerful to hear you speak. It is amazing when you talk with politicians and they say that just talking to one patient and hearing the reality actually makes them change the way they vote. So it's actually, you really have a lot of power, I think, as a patient advocate.
Yeah, I agree with everything Dr. Azad just said. Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think in terms of thinking about clinical trials as a patient, there's just so much that goes into that conversation, knowing what's out there, speaking the lingo, knowing KRAS, and if you have to look at that on clinicaltrials.gov. So it is a totally different language that I think is very stressful to think about. So I do think having that conversation with your oncologist and going to somebody for a second opinion to talk about trials is important, because it is a relatively small network. So we do try to know if there are slots. We talk about having slots and where those are and how we can, advocate for our patients sort of at the real life, everyday level. But it is really frustrating to know, there is a drug out there that we might be able to offer a patient. There's just not a slot when we're talking about a human. Yeah. So it's a very frustrating process for everybody.
Well, do you want to talk about some of how? Yes. Okay. Well, that's okay. Well, I'm plenty loud, but I'm a mother of 3. I don't need any microphone. But from the standpoint of there's so many exclusions, okay? And I mean, first of all, you don't want brain mets because good luck getting into any trial, okay? But there's all these other, if you don't strategically plan, okay, for the potential of a clinical trial, you're going to have been excluded because you are on immunotherapy or chemo or some other thing. And what can we do? And, I understand what you're saying politically, but right now, I mean, the bulk of our people and where the KRAS Kickers sits, we're at that critical mass point where I really, honestly, I worry about right now today. I'm not worried about 3 years or 6 months from now. And I individually have spoken to the FDA a number of times. They're very familiar with me. But, well, yes, as you can well imagine. But, and it's not going to change anything near fast enough that's going to make a difference probably for one of the people that's affected. So what can we do, or how can we work through that? And I'd love to hear that from either one of you.
I mean, I really do. I think it's important to be realistic, right? So I think realistically, the best way to do that is to really advocate for people to get second opinions. And the reason is because community providers, which are really the backbone of caregivers in America. So I have so much respect for community providers, but that kind of strategic thinking that you're talking about, well, if I do this, then I can't do this. And, here's my caveat and my contingency plan for 2 treatments down the road. That's hard for a community provider to do. They may not be aware of all the different options that are even coming down the road. Like, we have a sense of, I know that in 6 months, this particular company is going to have a drug, but it just happens to be because I'm working with them. And so I think that advocating to go to an expert in that field. And I think the other thing is opening up telemedicine. So I think it's also unrealistic to expect patients to travel. I mean, there's not even enough slots for people to go see that, but to say that somebody who lives in our catchment area in Western Pennsylvania or Western Maryland, it's very hard. It's very hard. You're on chemotherapy to then have to drive 6 hours to do, a second opinion. So COVID allowed us to be able to do that kind of service. And I think, that is actually something that the White House right now is taking very seriously and is trying to create kind of a blanket United States approval where you can get second opinions across the country. And I think that could be very helpful in that front.
I agree. I mean, I think your story also highlights how important groups like yours are in terms of just having patients realize what they should ask for and know about. I think, in the lung cancer world, I would say over my 5 or 6 years of being and attending, more patients are knowing to ask about their status in terms of different genes, but I wouldn't say that's everybody by any stretch. And so I think working with groups like yours, hearing about, we should know about that, it also kind of gives them access to knowing what they should be asking us about in terms of treatment options and what trials are, and what that looks like. But that's, here. So I think to Nilo's point, for patients who go to community or hybrid practices, knowing how to ask those questions early on and getting the second opinion just so they can start understanding the lingo, because it is very overwhelming to go to that type of an appointment compared to where they're used to going right down the road and know their nurse because that's one of their friends from high school. It's just a different vibe.
Showing up here, truthfully, and I'm
Yeah.
not even coming for treatment. Oh, I'm sorry. It's intimidating just even showing up here, not knowing where to go and what part. And I'm not even coming here for treatment, right? I mean, just being here and trying to figure out where it is to go. I'm in the wrong place, and whatever. And so I mean, it is really hard. But no, I agree. I mean, it's totally agree. Second opinion is fantastic. The community is hard, and even in the space, it's really hard to keep up. I mean, there's so much is happening so rapidly. Would you guys kind of like walk through for us like how it works for like compassionate use? Because that's like it's a fantastic sounding terminology, and I'd love to hear just.
So compassionate use is actually quite difficult, and it's difficult on many levels. So compassionate use means a company makes their drug available for compassionate use off of a clinical trial, but it's not yet FDA approved, or it is FDA approved, but they're making it available for an indication that it doesn't work. So the G12C inhibitors are a great example. When they were initially approved for lung cancer, we would try for compassionate use for colon cancer or for pancreatic cancer that had G12C because it wasn't FDA approved for anything but lung cancer initially. But the problem is if it's already FDA approved and you're asking, the company has to create a plan of how they're going to give it to you. So it has to be something the company cares about doing. Most companies do care, but it's just, they care a little less than making sure that their drug is marketed to the people that are going to pay for it. But if it's not FDA approved, then it's a huge burden, regulatory burden. When I say regulatory burden, it means you've got to get approvals. You've got to file toxicity information to the FDA. You've got to make promises to the FDA that you're going to follow patients in a certain way. That's impossible for a community provider to do who's seeing 25 patients in a day. When in my clinic, my 1 day of clinic a week, I see 16, 17 patients. A community provider is seeing 25 to 30, 5 days a week. And so they just don't have the bandwidth to do it. And so that's what compassionate use is. And if it happens, it generally happens realistically, for drugs that are approved in a new indication to get access to it.
How long does it take to
Usually a month. Yeah, usually a month. And that's if you find an engaged person who's willing to do it.
Yeah, I would agree with all of that. I mean, I think we're very lucky here because we have one of the most exceptional pharmacists I've ever met in my entire life. Well, the most exceptional pharmacist I've ever met. Sorry to everybody else. But it's a full-time job. I mean, that is what she does. She works on, and to Nilo's point, every company is a little different. The hoops you jump through, what paperwork you need, what kind of insurance would qualify. They have financial caps, people's incomes can only be so much. I mean, there are a lot of logistical considerations. And even with one person doing that full time for our clinic of 7 providers, I think if there were 2 of her, we would be able to fill both of their times. So, and it still takes a month, even with somebody, that diligent following it up on every day. So for clinics that don't have the administrative logistical infrastructure, I can't imagine, because I don't know how people who are in clinic most days of the week would ever have time to be on the phone doing that, sending those things, getting insurance, all of the sort of parts.
Yeah, the only reason I brought it up is because we're how like they throw it out there to us, like the FDA is like, oh well, yes, but you've got compassionate use. Like, oh, like I just call you up and you go, oh well, I feel compassionate, you may use it, and like it's that simple. Yeah. And from what I've seen, it's about 6 weeks to get paper through. It's amazing if you can do it in 4. I mean, I applaud you. Okay, and then the FDA is like, well, we can turn it around in 48 hours, and it's like, well, yeah, but they've got 6 weeks of requirements, and you're basically putting your license on line, okay, in order to do it, and that's assuming everything goes well. So so it is a policy problem, and it's not happening fast enough. But I want to hear from you guys. Okay, I want to hear questions. And Chris, would you run?
Yeah, we need to speak in the microphone because we are recording this session. So whenever you have a question, please get the microphone first.
Oh, okay. Hi, I'm really glad to be here. Thank you, Terry, for all of you. It's just it's really encouraging. I've been following you on YouTube. So just a bit of a background. I'm originally from Rwanda. I grew up in DRC. So I'm not afraid. Just to say, I'm not afraid to fight. To go. I know what it is to struggle. It's just sometimes it feels really unfair, just the whole system. I was diagnosed in 2022 with colon cancer, stage 3C, 6 months immediately after the FOLFOX, 12 cycles, did very well. Nodule pop. I had a nodule in my lung. And went straight into fall fury. It's the protocol. At some point early this year, I had the SBRT to ablate the big nodule, but immediately after, almost the first scan, I had 5 more pop up, and also potentially more growth in my ovaries. Just so, and I have a very rare type of KRAS, I think it's KRAS A146. So every time I want to find out about it, there's just not a lot on it. There's more on the others, the 12GC. I've looked at trials. I'm starting to look at trials. I get my treatment here. It wasn't the case before. I had to switch from Kaiser, and I still feel like with all the smart people, it's just so difficult to get the right, the counsel or the help. I'm glad you brought up the telemedicine. I was trying to get a second opinion. Mayo, it was impossible to get through. MD Anderson, they gave me an appointment for end of December. It's just horrible. I also called a doctor later on because she specializes in HIPIC, just in case. I'm just looking ahead because I feel like I can't just sit. I just want to know. Whatever it is, I just want to find out. Again, no telemedicine. You have to fly all the way to LA. It's exhausting. So thank you for this platform. It's so helpful.
And I just want to thank you for sharing your story. I mean, it until you actually hear what people are going through day to day to take care of themselves, it really, I think, is very informative for all of us, and it keeps motivating all of us to do what we're doing. So And if there's anything I can do to be helpful to you, you let me know.
Hey, I'm one of the oncologists here. I had a question. When we think about PD-1s and we look at lung cancer, we now have, I think, 7 approved PD-1s in lung cancer. If you open up New England Journal earlier this year, there's a perioperative study of pembrolizumab versus placebo. The Pacific study with durvalumab came out in 2017. I don't know how in 2024 you can randomize against placebo. And I wanted to ask, this is maybe more of a comment than a question, but we now have multiple companies with KRAS inhibitors. And I worry we're headed towards the same thing where every single company is going to randomize against placebo. No company is going to move us forward, and we're going to have 8 companies trying to split the market instead of working together. Is there anything we can do as a community to avoid what's happened with the PD-1 inhibitors, where we just have a gazillion agents and they're all similar and lots of patients get randomized to placebo when they should be getting an active KRAS inhibitor?
So I can't begin to tell you how much I agree with you, but like I always agree with you, so it's not all that surprising. But I have now given a couple of talks about drug development in this space when we have so much redundancy in drug development, nowhere more so than when it comes to PD-1 and PD-L1. Sorry, lung cancer doctors. But I think that we have to avoid that trap now. And I think that one of the things that I think people should do is be developing these drugs in different groups. So right now, because they're all coming, what happened with PD-1 is 1 or 2 happened, and then the next year another 1 or 2 happened, another 1 or 2. But because all of these people are actually developing all at the same time, I am hoping, and I am advocating, and other people that are, talking to these companies when we're there, are advocating for them to develop their drugs in different ways. So for example, some companies are already developing it in the resistance path, assuming that there's going to be resistance. In pancreatic cancer, in the next 3 years, every patient, in my opinion, is going to ubiquitously be getting a KRAS inhibitor in first line. And so all future drug development needs to take into account that a person will already have been on it and probably have progressed on it. So I think that people are getting smarter about it, but we as a community, I think, have to be pushing the companies to do it differently, to do the way a lot of trials are designed is that there's an early part where, like I was saying, the slow finding the right dose, and then they expand. And in that expansion, they should be expanding in different groups than they usually expand, and different and that allows different patients to get access too. But otherwise, we're going to end up with this glut, and we also aren't going to know what sequence to give them in. There's G12D inhibitors, but there's also multi-pan-RAS inhibitors. Which should you give first? And so that we can answer those questions in the trials now if we design them properly.
Yeah, but what's holding that back specifically? Because like that, Amy, it makes more sense just literally to.
Can you explain to a layperson, I'm a patient, what is randomized placebo is? What is that? So as a patient, something I can be aware of.
Yeah, great. So there's different phases of trials. So there's like a phase 1 trial, which is where you're looking at the drug to see if it works. And like Neela was saying, different doses, or in some cases, there's phase 1 trials that combine drugs we know the doses of together to see if those doses work. Then we move into randomized trials, which means patients get put into a group of either the drug that we're trying to study, or in some cases, they're randomized to either placebo or what is currently standard of care. So that's called a randomized placebo-controlled study. So the randomization is, in theory, an objective thing done by a computer. So we, as the investigators, are not part of the decision of which one you go on. Sometimes you'll see they're called blinded, which means we, as the investigators, don't see what drug you're getting, and then you, as the patient, might not be aware of what drug you're getting. So those are sort of some of the vocab words that go into the titles of the studies. Yeah.
So from a communications perspective on clinical trials, I always thought it was best or better, meaning you're either randomized to what's currently the best treatment or potentially something better, meaning the clinical trials agent. If there are what then determines studies where that's the case, where you're getting standard of care randomized versus the clinical trial, or this clinical trial agent and placebo? What makes the difference in the kind of trial that's designed that would include one of those others?
So ethically, you have to give every patient on a trial the best, at least the best that is known. So the only studies that are placebo controlled with nothing but placebo is in the latest line of therapy when there is nothing left. So if there's you can only get a placebo arm that's pure placebo if you actually don't have any option left. So if someone has gone through all of their treatment options. But placebo-controlled trials can also happen when a patient gets standard chemotherapy. So, in colon cancer, FOLFOX plus KRAS drug versus FOLFOX plus placebo. So you still get FOLFOX, but you just don't know if you get the KRAS drug. So placebo doesn't always mean that you get nothing else, but it just means that you don't know if you get that drug or not. And the FDA is starting to wise up to this, especially in small biomarker cohorts. So in cholangiocarcinoma, which is a rare cancer, bile duct cancer, the reason everyone does placebo-controlled trials is because that's what the FDA insisted on for approvals. But now when you've got a small group of patients that you can't get enough patients, you can't randomize, people won't do it or you just can't get it. The FDA has now allowed people to do different kinds of confirmation studies where maybe they look at 2 different doses rather than making half the people get placebo. So it's slow going with the FDA, but they are starting to change.
Do you guys have other questions?
Questions from fellow in the lab.
Anybody?
I think it's
No, I mean, it needs to be an open forum, okay? Because it's not a matter of like just let us patients ask the questions and whatever. Because I'll start hitting them up with questions right here. So here's your shot. Yeah.
Hello, I'm also a colorectal cancer patient, and let's talk. I was originally diagnosed in 2019, went through stage 3, I think C, went through the FOLFOX, came back, had more surgery, liver, ovaries, FOLFIRI, no evidence of disease for over a year. Then it came back in my peritoneum, so I had HIPEC. Now I'm back on FOLFIRI, and luckily things are stable. But I've actually, just to the point of getting into trials, I've signed the paperwork on, 3 trials. One was guess it's a CAR T, and you had to have a certain HLA type and all of that. I had half of what I needed. So, okay, I'll give you that. But the other 2 trials, and one was a KRAS, didn't make it past screening for various reasons. So it is very difficult. So I appreciate all the things that you're talking about. A question on the compassionate use. Who typically initiates that process? Is it usually like the patient, all of that, or do you have to usually go through your oncologist?
It's usually the oncologist, but there is a patient section that the patient has to fill out with kind of some, demographic information, your insurance information, and so, because the oncologist is the one who's taking responsibility for treating you, it's they that have to get the approval.
Okay.
Okay, if there are no more questions, I thank you very much for being here. Don't leave just yet, because we have a nice reception prepared for us, so we can get to talk one-on-one and interact a little more over cookies and drinks, I guess. And thank you so much. It was great.